Well everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the iPad mini 7th generation that just came out and compare it against the iPad 10th generation and see which particular iPad is the better one for you. Now, I did find a glitch on Apple's website as I was actually making this comparison, and if you actually go into their compare page, it still tells you that the iPad 10th generation is $499, and when you actually go and buy it through that link, it is still $499. But when you go to Apple's own website for their iPad, it tells you it's $349, which is the new price, and when you go check out through there, it's $349. So make sure you do not buy it from their compare page because that's still the old price and it's still charging you $499, although it is $349 on some websites. So I don't even understand what's going on here. But if you want to pick up either one of these iPads throughout this whole entire video, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of both these iPads, the iPad 10th generation, which came out back in 2022, on the front side of this iPad is giving you a 10.9-inch liquid retina display. So it's a good looking panel. I like this panel a lot, and I do think if you are going to go through and pick up a device, I do think this is a very good looking iPad. It looks fairly similar kind of to like an iPad Pro, although you're getting thicker bezels on this thing and the display is not nearly as nice. You could kind of make the argument that the design of both these are still fairly premium. There's no home button on the iPad 10th generation. It looks very good, and I do think if you're going to go and pick up an iPad, I like the fact that this thing is big and large and it's still giving you things like True Tone. It is lacking out on things like a 60Hz display and those things, but I still think it's a good looking display nonetheless. But it's not a great looking display by any means. On the iPad mini 7th generation of the A17 Pro model, this one is a little bit different. So this one is significantly smaller. So that is just one big thing to keep in mind. If you are going to go through and pick up an iPad, you have to remember that that is a significantly smaller iPad than the iPad 10. So the iPad mini 7 is giving you an 8.3-inch liquid retina display. So it's significantly smaller, It still has P3 wide color gamut, True Tone display, and it has this anti-reflective coating that the iPad 10th generation does not have. So that is kind of an advantage for that type of device when it kind of comes down to it too. On top of that, some other big things going on here as well is that you are getting things like on the iPad 10th generation. You're getting USB Type-C ports on both of these, which is nice, flat sides on both. The iPad mini 7 does support the Apple Pencil 2nd generation, where the iPad 10 does not support that. So in my personal opinion, that was kind of a disadvantage on that. I would have loved to have gotten, Apple Pencil 2 support on the iPad 10. Unfortunately, we did not get that. So that's kind of where we're at with that. On the backside, standard aluminum backs on both, which look and feel very, very good. They perform fairly well. You're also getting things like, a single camera setup on the backside, which we'll talk more in detail in a second. But beyond that, there's not really anything else like super insane that we haven't seen before. I think both these iPads hold up fairly well when it comes down to the body standpoint, the build quality standpoint, everything like that. And they both really do feel like very expensive, tablets. It just so happens that in my personal opinion, if you're going to go and look at both, you're probably going to be getting an overall maybe better experience on neither one of these. They're both relatively the same thing when it kind of comes down to it. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there too. Now, on top of that, when it comes down to the price tag, a very big thing to keep in mind here is that the iPad 10th generation has been out for a little bit. You can basically get that thing for like $300 and something in the used market. The brand new market is $349. However, with the iPad mini 7th generation, this thing basically costs you $679 for the base model. So the iPad 10 is like half the price of that device. So if you're really looking at it from that standpoint, you're really going to be getting a much cheaper tablet on the iPad mini 7. So that is kind of a big thing to keep in mind here. And if you are wanting the device that's going to be cheaper, it basically is almost in every single way going to be the iPad, 10th generation. So keep that in mind as if you're looking through these. Now from the camera side, both are giving you relatively around the same type of camera layout as well. There's not really anything super crazy going on here because there's just a lot of overlap when it kind of comes down to it. So a big thing to keep in mind here is that both are giving you 4K in the back. They're both giving you ultra-wide cameras on the front with center stage. So there is quite a bit of, similarity when it comes down to that kind of stuff here too. So that in and of itself is another very big thing to keep in mind. I think if you're looking at both these tablets though, they're both going to be giving you fairly solid cameras. But I would always say this, if you have something, let's say like an iPad, let's say you have something like an iPhone 12 in your pocket, right? Let's say you use an iPhone 12. Well, you're going to be getting a better camera inside of the iPhone 12 than you are going to be inside of the iPhone, than any of these iPads. The only real advantage I would say between these two is that on something like the iPad mini 7, you are getting flash on the back. So that is kind of a nice thing to have that like flash sensor on the back if you really want it. But even then, I don't think it's like the biggest deal in the world. And I would probably say you're probably still going to have a really, really good time with something like the iPad, mini 7 or iPad 10. There's not really going to be like this big of a difference when it comes down to either one, in my personal opinion. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there too. Now, on top of that, when it comes down to software longevity, both these iPads are going to be supported with software for, a bit more time. I would probably go off on the limb and say the iPad mini 7 is going to last for a longer period of time than the iPad 10. So the iPad 10, has already been out for a couple of years. It has basically the same chipset, I would imagine, as something like the iPhone 12. So that's kind of what we're getting inside of that particular, iPad. So we're not going to be getting this super long lasting device on that one, which is totally okay. It's already been out for a little bit of time. So once again, that's kind of where we're at when it kind of comes down to it. So it's not the biggest deal in the world, but if you are wanting the longer lasting tablet, it pretty much is going to be something like the iPad, iPad 10 generation. Now, the thing that I still prefer a lot on the iPad, mini 7 that I just want to kind of circle back on is the fact that it is giving you Apple Pencil 2nd generation support. The Apple Pencil 2 was something that I feel like, is a much better performing, it's just a way better way of just experiencing your tablet. And I do feel like in that way, it makes a lot more sense for the average person to go through and buy something like an iPad mini 7 just because of that Apple Pencil support. If you don't care about Apple Pencil, then it doesn't really matter. But if you do, then that's kind of a big deal. Now, I would probably say also the iPad 10th generation is going to be the one that's going to last, it's going to be having a longer battery life as well. So that is kind of just one big thing to kind of keep in mind there, but it's not really like this big massive deal anyway. Now, on top of that, some other big stuff to keep in mind here is the fact that between both, once again, you're basically going to be getting a pretty solid experience when it comes down to the performance. So the iPad 10 generation is giving you that Apple A14 Bionic chip inside of it, where the iPad mini 7 generation is giving you the Apple A17 Pro chip inside of it. So there's definitely way more RAM inside of the iPad mini 7. You're getting Apple Intelligence inside of the iPad mini 7 as well. And that is definitely going to be the faster, better performing tablet in almost every single way. I think depending on what you're going to do though, you're probably still going to have a pretty decent time with something like the iPad 10 though. Like, I feel like that's still going to be like a pretty good tablet depending on what you're going to do on an everyday basis. I feel like that is going to be the one that I personally wouldn't mind really owning. Like, I feel like that is still a very good performing tablet when it comes down to it. But the iPad mini 7 with having that A17 Pro chip, that is basically the same chipset that the iPhone 15 Pro had. So that is kind of a big deal, and I would probably say when it comes down to that side, that is a really, really big advantage for that type of device. And personally for me, I think that's a big advantage for that type of phone when it comes down to it as well. So overall, what I'm probably going to tell you is that when it comes down to both of these, I definitely do think both of these tablets are very good options. They're very good, but if you have the money, if you have the option, I would recommend going up to something like an iPad mini 7. I think that one is going to be the better one here. I think if you can, I would probably swing for something like the iPad, Air 2, to be honest. But that's kind of how I see both these things kind of happening, right? I feel like both these are great, but if you want the better one, it's probably going to be the iPad, mini 7. But the iPad 10, I think, is still fairly decent for the most part as well. So that's kind of how I see both these phones both these tablets kind of holding up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.